An area of unexplained discoloration on the back of an 18-year-old's head, a forensic pathologist who says he cannot rule out foul play, and a family still waiting, 3 weeks later, for a single confirmed answer. Tonight, what the independent autopsy in the Nolan Wells case actually says, and what it doesn't. Horn Island sits roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, a federally protected barrier island, accessible only by boat, known for shifting shoreline and long stretches with no cell service. On July 4, 2026, 18-year-old Nolan Xavier Wells traveled there by boat with a group of friends to celebrate the holiday. It wasn't his first trip to the island. His family says he'd been before. He was a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College, a recent graduate of Ocean Springs High School, and was expected back on campus that summer to begin training for the coming season. By the time his friend's boat returned to the mainland that afternoon, Nolan was not with them. His mother, Christine Wansley, reported him missing that night, after receiving a phone call around 11 p.m. A search began soon after, involving the Jackson County Sheriff's Office and volunteer search teams. On the morning of July 6th, a U.S. park ranger found a body in the water off the island's northwestern shore. It was Nolan. Reporting from CNN and NBC has noted one detail that quickly became part of the public conversation around this case. Nolan was reportedly the only black person in the friend group that traveled to the island that day. Given Mississippi's history, that detail alone drew national attention and raised questions from the family and from outside observers about whether race played any role in what happened or in how the case has been investigated. No evidence connecting race directly to Nolan's death has been publicly presented by investigators or by the family's legal team. It remains at this stage a documented fact about the group's makeup and a source of public concern, not a confirmed element of the case itself. Within days, the family would take a step rarely seen this early in a case like this, hiring a nationally known civil rights attorney and commissioning a second independent autopsy. Very little about the hours between roughly 3 p.m. when Nolan was last seen on the island, according to attorney Ben Crump's office, and the group's return to shore has been independently confirmed. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has publicly asked anyone with photos, video, or eyewitness accounts from Horn Island that day to come forward, and has described the investigation as active and ongoing. One piece of the public conversation involved a video that circulated online, which some viewers believed showed Nolan in a confrontation shortly before he went missing. Speaking on Good Morning America, Nolan's friend Trayston Shepard addressed that video directly, saying the raised voice in the recording was his own, not Nolan's, and that it was unrelated to Nolan. That account has not been independently verified beyond Shepard's own statement, and it's presented here as exactly that, one friend's on-camera account, not a confirmed forensic finding. Mississippi officials initially described Nolan's death as a drowning. The family, through Crump, has publicly rejected that characterization, describing Nolan as a strong swimmer with an athletic build, and saying, in Crump's words, that so many things don't pass the smell test. Investigators say they don't currently suspect foul play. The family says there's no way this was simply an accident. Both of those are statements from their respective sources, and neither has been proven. Here's where the facts get more concrete, because this is where actual documentation exists. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office performed its own autopsy on July 7th, the day after Nolan's body was recovered. As of this update, the state has not publicly released the results of that autopsy. Unsatisfied with the pace and transparency of the state's process, the family, through Crump, arranged for a second independent autopsy. Nolan's body was flown to Washington, D.C., where the exam was performed on July 10th by Dr. Roger Mitchell, a board-certified forensic pathologist, former chief medical examiner for Washington, D.C., and current president of the National Medical Association, the oldest and largest professional organization of black physicians in the United States. According to Crump's legal team, that independent autopsy was privately funded, reportedly by former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick. That funding detail matters for one reason. It means Dr. Mitchell's examination was conducted entirely outside of any state or local government structure, a point the family has said was important to them from early in the process. On July 22nd, nearly 3 weeks after Nolan disappeared, Crump stood in front of a packed room at the Knox 117th National Convention in Chicago and read Dr. Mitchell's preliminary findings aloud, for the first time, in public. The headline finding, straight from the preliminary report, cause and manner of death, undetermined, pending further investigation. Beyond that central conclusion, a few specific things were documented. Dr. Mitchell's exam found no skull fractures and no lacerations of the skin. Across most of the body, the independent exam did not identify obvious signs of blunt force trauma consistent with a severe beating or a violent, prolonged assault. There was one specific finding that's driven most of the coverage since, an area of discoloration in the deep soft tissue on the back of Nolan's head, over the occipital region, described in NBC's reporting as significant. The cause of that discoloration is, in Mitchell's own words, unknown. It's worth being precise about what that means. This isn't a bruise visible on the skin's surface. It was found during the internal portion of the exam, in tissue beneath the skin, without a corresponding skull fracture. It could reflect an impact. It could relate to the process of drowning itself. It could reflect decomposition. CNN's reporting on the case has noted the body showed signs of decomposition consistent with several days in Gulf Coast water, or handling of the body during recovery. Dr. Mitchell's report does not claim to know which. Separately, and this is a real documented limitation, not speculation, Crump said the state's medical examiner's office had already retained certain internal neck structures, including the trachea and hyoid bone, before Mitchell's exam took place, and had already dissected the organs, which CNN and NBC both describe as standard forensic practice when a body has already had one autopsy performed. Because of that sequencing, Mitchell was not able to directly examine those neck structures himself. The hyoid bone specifically is one of the structures forensic pathologists look to when trying to rule strangulation in or out of a death. Without access to it, Mitchell's report states plainly that he cannot rule out injury to the neck as a contributor to Nolan's death, not because he found evidence of it, but because he was never able to check. CNN's own reporting quotes Mitchell's written limitations directly. The most significant gap in his exam, in his own words, was the inability to directly observe the airway and lungs for water, and directly observe the stomach for gastric contents, both already examined and altered during the state's initial autopsy. Neither autopsy, state or independent, has produced toxicology results as of this update. 2 separate examinations, 2 separate labs, both currently stalled at the same missing piece. So here's what's confirmed, stated plainly, without embellishment. An undetermined cause and manner of death, from both the state and the independent examination. A documented, unexplained area of discoloration on the back of Nolan's head, with no clear cause identified. An independent exam that was limited by structures the state's office had already retained. A forensic pathologist's own statement that he cannot rule out injury to the neck because he wasn't able to examine the one structure that would help confirm or exclude it. And still, from either side, no toxicology. What remains genuinely open, whether that discoloration came from an impact, from the drowning process itself, or from decomposition and handling, whether the retained neck structures would have shown anything relevant, and what toxicology, whenever it finally comes back, actually reveals. An unexplained finding is not the same thing as a confirmed cause. A pathologist saying he cannot rule out foul play is not the same as a pathologist saying he's found evidence of it. Both statements are true right now, and this case deserves them reported as exactly what they are. Before any of this, before the reports, the press conferences, the competing timelines, Nolan Wells was, in his own words from an interview with Lokes the year before he died, someone who described being surrounded by some of his best friends and teammates as truly a blessing. He was days away from returning to Southwest Mississippi Community College to prepare for a football season he wouldn't see. His parents, Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley, have spent the last 3 weeks doing something no parent should have to do, pushing for basic answers about how their son died, 3 weeks after saying goodbye to him on an ordinary holiday afternoon that turned out to be the last one they'd ever have. This is where the case stands, as of July 24, 2026, undetermined, still waiting on toxicology from 2 separate examiners, and still short the one piece of evidence, an examination of the retained neck structures that could meaningfully narrow what actually happened to Nolan Wells. We'll be back with an update the moment either side's toxicology results become public. If you have information about what happened on Horn Island on July 4th, Jackson County Sheriff's Office has asked that you contact them directly. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
An autopsy will be provided for the media at press@bencrump.com. And so, Mr. Jones, keep that. I don't need this one. I just need this one here. Pull this closer. So, pull this up here. So, Dr. Roger Mitchell, board-certified forensic pathologist, performed a preliminary report on the death of Nolan Xavier Wells. He conducted and presented this report on July 19th, 2026. Preliminary report, second autopsy, death of Nolan Xavier Wells. Cause of death, undetermined, pending investigation. And we'll explain that as we go through the report this morning. The manner of death, undetermined, pending investigation. Statement of examination. This forensic pathologist was retained to perform a second autopsy examination on the body of Nolan Xavier Wells. Name of decedent, Nolan Xavier Wells. Age, 18 years old. Race, black. Gender, male. Date of death, unknown. Second autopsy date was performed on July 10th, 2026. Preliminary findings, and this is significant. Focal area of red discoloration in the soft tissue of the back of the head, the occipital region. He said the etiology is unknown at this time. He said the body was received after the initial autopsy. He said the body had marked decompensation. He said coronal incision of the scalp, brain removal, Y-shaped incision of the anterior torso, and he talked about the organs being removed, as is common, accompanied in the body cavity. And that when you have an autopsy, the organs are removed from the body and they are dissected and examined, and then they are put back in a bag within inside the body. So when they're buried, their remains will all be with them. But in this occasion, if there's going to be a second autopsy, then the organs are put in the body cavity so the second pathologist could be able to examine the organs as well. Very significant for Dr. Mitchell was that the anterior inner neck structures were absent, not received with the body. And we'll explain that in just a minute. And then it talks about the additional procedures performed during the second autopsy, and we'll go into the paragraphs on that there because he explains it better in his narrative. So where's the first page of the discussion? Not the diagram yet. You can keep the diagram over there. Move this back, Lisa. So he talks in the preliminary discussion opinion. This forensic pathologist identified several limitations during the second autopsy that create barriers to establishing a definitive cause and manner of death for Nolan Xavier Wells. And that's important. He talks about the fact that we didn't get to see the body when it was first recovered, like the medical examiner working for Mississippi would have seen it. He talked about the second autopsy performed on Nolan Wells revealed marked decompensation or changes. Marked decompensation can obscure the presence and absence of bruising on the skin, surface, especially during a second autopsy examination. What he's saying, because the body was so decomposed that you couldn't tell if there was bruises or abrasions on the body when he received it on the 10th of July. For these reasons, additional dissection procedures not performed during the first autopsy examination were performed to rule out potential blunt force injuries responsible for the death. These procedures included facial dissection, posterior head and neck dissection, dissection of the ribs, the pelvic, dissection of the subcutaneous and deep soft tissue, dissection of the back, the buttocks, the arms and legs. He did all of this to rule out things. He ruled out there were no fractures or deep tissue injuries identified. This was very important because he wanted to be very thorough and very transparent, because transparency is the key to getting to the answers of why Nolan Wells is not with us. So he did that there and was very straightforward, very open, very open. He says, however, dissection of the back of the head during the layered posterior neck dissection revealed a 12 by 8 inch focal area of red discoloration in the deep soft tissues overlaying the occipital bone. And he talked about how he found red discoloration when he cut open into the back of his head towards the occipital bone, and he saw the red discoloration, and we actually saw the pictures of it. It's significant. You can't help but notice, why is this dark red here in the back of his head? And so he was important to note that in his report. He said that etiology of this finding is unclear. There are no lacerations of the overlaying skin nor fractures of the underlying skull. These findings are inconclusive for perimortem injury due to both the extensive decomposition and the absence of associated injuries. This finding, however, is significant enough to be highlighted in this preliminary report for further investigation. It is important to reiterate that the finding could not have been observed in the first autopsy because the posterior head and neck dissection were not performed. He said another limitation, move this back here. Another limitation faced by this forensic pathologist was the absence of the anterior internal neck structures. The trachea and the laryngeal cartilage, the thyroid horn, and the hyoid bone were not received with the body. So he's saying that the throat was not received with the body when he got Nolan Wells' body in Washington, D.C. to perform the second autopsy. And so let's discuss that with what he said about that. He said, it is assumed that the initial pathologist retained these structures for additional evaluation. He said the retention of the anterior neck structures during an initial autopsy is a common forensic pathology practice. He was chief medical examiner for 7 years in Washington, D.C., and he said that if they had concern about throat or any fracture or compression of the throat, they too will hold them back. He doesn't know why they held the throat back, but he said the throat was not with the body of Nolan Wells when he received it in Washington, D.C. to perform the second autopsy. He said, nevertheless, a posterior neck dissection performed without review of the anterior neck structures is incomplete. Therefore, this pathologist cannot rule out injury to the neck as a contributor or a cause of death. He said he would need to have the medical examiner in Mississippi allow him to review the throat. That's why he said his autopsy is undetermined pending investigation. Remember, it's about transparency. Because the initial autopsy rightfully removed and dissected each organ, there are additional limitations inherent in the second autopsy of Nolan Wells. The most significant of the limitations was the inability to directly observe the airway and the lungs for water and directly observe the stomach for gastric contents. He said it is very significant as to what the initial forensic scientists who got to review the body when it was recovered. We have heard from our call center people saying the body wasn't waterlogged. Well, we need to know those things. But unfortunately, because the body was decomposed and the organs have already been dissected, those are things we can only get from the initial autopsy. So therefore, again, the manner and cause of death is undetermined until further investigation. We are hopeful that the Mississippi Medical Examiner would give Dr. Mitchell an opportunity to see their photographs and their observations to the condition of Nolan Wells' body closer in time to July 4th. That is very important, and we have to continue to demand transparency, President Johnson. In addition, the original toxicology results have not been received at the time of this report, and we continue to wait for the toxicology to come back because, again, that will be part of the investigation into Nolan Wells' autopsy by Dr. Mitchell. It is significant to note that it's many things that go into toxicology that only Dr. Mitchell would be able to opine upon, and medical experts can opine upon. And he feels the proper place to do that is before a grand jury in a courtroom. And so we would hope that the district attorney would present Dr. Mitchell before the grand jury as well. We want all relevant information to be heard by the grand jury. Lastly, in cases where a death has occurred in or around a body of water, can you move this back? This is important. Okay, right. Lastly, in cases where a death has occurred in or around a body of water with suspicion of drowning, it is important to confirm how that person entered the water. This is the crux of the matter. This information is especially important for those deaths of persons who can swim. As in the case with Nolan Wells, at the time of this report, this forensic pathologist does not know the condition of Nolan Wells. He did not know whether he was conscious or unconscious when he entered the water. He said that would be significant. He said he did not know whether he was forced into the water or unforced into the water. He said that would be significant. So he said the condition of Nolan Wells before he entered the water would be the crux of the matter. It would be of utmost importance to being able to determine a cause and manner of death. He said, definitive circumstances of death are required to determine the manner of death. For these reasons, this pathologist cannot rule out, and let me really call your attention to this. For these reasons, this pathologist cannot rule out if any intervening non-accidental factors contributed to or caused the death of Nolan Wells. Understand, he said based on the examination of the body, he cannot rule out foul play. That is significant. With the following questions still outstanding, number one, what were the circumstances that led to Nolan Xavier Wells entering the water? Number two, what was the body position when it was found? We know that a member of the United Cajun Navy said that he was face down and he was fully clothed. Number three, was there water in the airway? Remember he talked about the lungs and the airways, were they filled with water? Number four, is there any evidence of injuries to the anterior neck structure? We got the autopsy without his neck. We got the body without his neck at the time of the second autopsy. Number five, is there any evidence of any intracranial hemorrhaging? He said that is going to be very significant. Things that he could not observe at autopsy that the initial medical examiner would have been able to observe. Number six, was the composition of what was the composition of the stomach contents? He talks about that being important because when was he found? How long had he been in the water? How long had it been since his last meal? All those things become relevant factors when you're trying to do a thorough and impartial autopsy. And number seven, what are the toxicology report findings? He said the best classification again for the cause and manner of death for Nolan Xavier Wells is undetermined pending investigation. This forensic pathologist reserves the right to review and incorporate additional forensic pathology information into his opinion as it becomes available. He says the above opinions are expressed to a reasonable degree of medical certainty. Dr. Roger A. Mitchell, July 19, 2026. And we know that, as I said, this is only another part of the puzzle. And even though it tells us significant information, we still have more questions than we have answers at this time. And we will continue to press forward and persist, Christine and Elmore, with getting the answers to these questions. Because as you, yes, we will persist, because as Christine and Elmore and Attorney Parker and I talked this morning, we know that there are so many conflicting stories.